Thank you. I believe I am the oldest person in this room by some 30 years.
No.
Let me explain who I am. I am recently retired American diplomat. The area of my expertise started out as the Soviet Union. I was a Soviet hand under the Reagan administration. Later, I became interested in Poland, and after 1989, I was involved in the transformation of Europe after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the enlargement of NATO, the European Union, and now the defense of the West against, frankly, Putin's aggressive behavior. Now, I have been accused in the Russian media of being anti-Russian. I have also been accused of being the gray cardinal of the color revolutions 10 years ago. America isn't that good. We're not that smart. You know, I wish we could sort of just go in and with no budget at all change other governments, but we're not that good. That's not our intention. But I am a believer, and my closest colleagues in and out of governments do believe in the free world and in defending the free world against aggression. And in Europe, that aggression is coming principally from Russia. I do not believe that Russia is civilizationally doomed to be its worst self. I believe there could be a better Russia, but I think Russia is attempting to export its domestic weakness because it will not reform at home or feels it cannot reform at home. The Russians compensate by conquest and influence abroad. When they fail, if they fail, they may turn inward. Now, I mention this to just give you a sense of where I'm coming from. My last job in government was the sanctions coordinator in the Department of State, and I was the chief negotiator of the Russia sanctions imposed because of Ukraine. I was also involved in the Obama administration's rather insufficient sanctions last December because of the Russia cyber hacking. All right, so that's my perspective, both a political one and a foreign policy one, and an understanding of sanctions. Now, this session is supposed to be on corruption. I am not an expert on how to root out corruption. God knows it exists everywhere. It is the Russian system. Putinism seems to be based on an institutionalization of corruption rather than a privatization of corruption. And you all know this better than I do. But I do have something to say, and I learned something about the way Russian money flows. I learned this in the course of doing sanctions. One of the things I learned is that the Russians tend to use some of the same bad actors, cutouts, as channels for multiple bad projects. And I will give you a concrete example. Some of you may know a man called Prigozhin. He is known as a caterer for the Kremlin. And he was, the Americans, the Obama administration, sanctioned him because of his support for Ukrainian separatists last December. Now, why did we sanction a Kremlin caterer? Because he has sideline hobbies, among them being a money channel for Russian, possibly Kremlin support for the separatists. It is also alleged that he was a conduit for support for some of the strange militias and Chechen paramilitary groups in Syria. And it is also alleged that he is a source of funding the notorious St. Petersburg troll farm, right? An arm of propaganda. I mention this as a concrete example of what I was talking about earlier. That is, a single actor used as a conduit, a cutout for questionable money and corruption at the same time. Propaganda, separatism, war. Same person. We sanctioned Prigozhin because of Ukraine. but we were not blind to the fact that this was a triple. You sanction somebody from Ukraine, you may close down various bad channels. The West is only now beginning to organize itself to defend its institutions against dirty Russian money, which has been weaponized by the Kremlin as an element of subversion. This is not new. This is Comintern tactics, but updated for the 21st century. The tool of sanctions is it's only one tool. The tool of using private internet sources to counter Russian disinformation and propaganda with the truth is another one, and government should stay away. I don't believe in official government propaganda, and if we even counter propaganda, we're just not very good at it. Investigative journalists, such as yourself, can be an important tool in fighting this corruption. The use of sanctions and the use of transparency to uncover dirty money is highly information dependent. The U.S. government has its own sources of information, but frankly, the U.S. government had nothing to do with the exposure of the Panama Papers, which uncovered whole new channels of Kremlin money. Investigative journalists did that. And I suspect that in an internet age, people decades younger than me are going to be the ones to uncover these channels of money. Now, the reason I mentioned at the outset the foreign policy context is because I don't want you to think that the objective is anti-Russian per se. It is not. It is an attempt to blunt Russian aggression, because in my experience, the last 200 years of Russian history suggests that when Russia fails at external aggression, it enters periods of internal reform and progress. Crimean War, serfs are liberated. Failure in the Russo-Japanese War, there's a Duma. You get the pattern, the beginning of reform. The West, and certainly America, wants a better relationship with a better Russia. And the way we get there is by defeating the bad Russia we're contending with. Look, that's a survey. I can't tell you how to do your jobs. I am an internet illiterate. I am a caveman. I mean, I understand. I am more familiar with pamphleteering from the 1930s than I am with 21st century technology. But I wanted to give you this context. Yeah. Anyway, I'm supposed to answer questions, right?
Absolutely. Ambassador, thank you very much for this introduction. My name is Katarzyna Pisarska. I'm the founder and director of the European Academy of Diplomacy. Some of you know me because the Academy actually brings leaders, including journalists, to a number of programs trying to support that huge potential that is in the young people and leaders from all across the world. I think this topic is extremely important here in Central Europe, in Europe generally, but also in the West, because in a sense, we are responsible for what is happening. Yes, Russia has always weaponized money, but we have been taking that money. And I can give you more than enough of examples of high-level politicians, for example, Gerhard Schröder in Germany, where actually no consequences have been followed in situations that were very, let's say, morally tricky. So where is our homework done? Is there enough of consciousness today in our societies, including the United States, how dangerous it is to get involved in money that does not serve simple business purposes, but which is a money highly weaponized by a state that wants to influence, but also wants to weaken us and our resolve?
Well, no country, including my own, is immune from the temptation of corruption. Immanuel Kant was right. humanity is crooked timber. We are imperfect and imperfectible, and that means every country will include corrupt individuals. So I am aware that when I encourage investigative journalists in your part of the world to uncover rotten Russian money, you pull on those threads, and they will lead also to us. That is Western societies. Okay? It was very gracious of you not to mention the ongoing investigations in my country.
I was sure you would.
Right. But we Americans cannot be hypocrites. We are not beyond the sins of the world, so to speak. But our institutions are supposed to be better and stronger than we are as individuals. Therefore, have at it. And do your jobs. And don't pull your punches. Pull those threads wherever they lead. I am well aware that Gerhard Schroeder took a Russian seat on the original Nord Stream board. And my German colleagues have the good grace to be ashamed and embarrassed about that. But who am I as an American to start suggesting that we Americans are immune from that sort of thing? But we will find correction only under pressure. That is why our system is essentially adversarial, and why I am encouraging you all, the journalists of the 21st century, to go after that. Keep us honest.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes for questions, and absolutely. I do encourage you to ask questions to our guests. Do we have any? You're visible.
May I ask?
Yeah, please.
I'm from Russia, and I'm from Anti-Corruption Foundation by Alexei Navalny, and all our investigations trace money to Liechtenstein, to Great Britain, to France, and for example, case with Mr. Chaika, with the General Prosecutor of Russia, we file a case to the General Prosecutor of Switzerland that Mr. Chaika and his son is a part of organized crime. What was did Swiss prosecutor? He signed a report to the Mr. Chaika as a General Prosecutor of Russia and asked him, "Are you a part of criminal organization?" Of course, answer was no, and no sequences for Mr. Chaika. So we fight corruption. We try to find I called it post-communist mafia state, but the civil society in Russia is very weak, and it's very young, and we have no support from as in the institution of West. If I'm a physical person, could put money. I couldn't put money in the Western bank if I have $10,000. But if I have $10 million, no problem. Private banking, Liechtenstein Trust, with a very good advocate and so on. And we couldn't disclose information from Liechtenstein, from German Register of Property and so on, or from New York, for example. A lot of property from New York are held not by physical but by offshore company, and there is no law about beneficiary disclaimer, beneficiary disclosure.
First of all, I admire the courage of all Russian investigative journalists who operate in an atmosphere which we in the West can barely understand. I remember Soviet times. What you call the Putin system is something I can't say. You did. But it is difficult. What can we do? In the short run, falsehood wins. In the long run, it doesn't. It is possible that as the West mobilizes itself to defend against Russian corruption, which feeds on our own weaknesses, that we will anathematize and stigmatize the corruption that you were talking about. And this will make it more possible to go after the corrupt banks in the West that are dealing with dirty Russian money. There is legislation in the United States passed almost unanimously by the Senate, pending before the House of Representatives, which includes provisions to go after corruption in Russia, allows us to sanction corruption in Russia, including things like unjust privatizations. I don't know whether this legislation will pass, but it looks like something might. The EU, I suspect, will start looking at this question more seriously. I can't speak for the French government, but I don't think Macron is going to be terribly sentimental about Moscow after what they tried to do in the French elections. Therefore, groups like yours and the information you provide to expose the sorts of things you're talking about are going to be critical. Easy for me to say, and sometimes, frankly, dangerous for you and your colleagues to do. But the end result, if we are successful, will be setting higher standards. We did this with communism. We exposed communist propaganda and anathematized it. And that led to a failure of Soviet aggression in the early 1980s, and ultimately to a failed but almost successful Russian process of democratization. And I do not believe that Russia is doomed to its worst history. I don't believe that. Therefore, what you say is important, and I suspect that in the West there will be a growing, not a shrinking, audience for the information you deliver. Again, easy for me to say, right? Hard for you to do. But you are the honest journalists in Russia and in Eurasia are the carriers of your best national tradition. And I believe, maybe in my naive American optimism, that in the long run there is such a thing as truth and progress. And good luck to you.
Thank you, Ambassador, very much. I'm afraid that our time is up. It's a very snap session, and we have a coffee break now for 15 minutes. And of course, if you would like to speak with Ambassador Fried on a more personal basis, he is around here. So thank you for the time you have spent here with us.
Thank you.